So they just jumped from LinkedIn to Google, or Google to Cisco, or Cisco to Facebook, to, from Oracle to whatever, right? The new hot startup or something like that. But they're still not fulfilled because they never got clear at the very beginning of what they really wanted. Like when you're clear on that, it's so easy to find something that fulfills you. And everybody else just kind of jumps from thing to thing, hoping that it's going to be better.
Welcome to the Happy Engineer podcast, the place where we help engineers like you to build your career, balance your life, and be happy. I'm Zach White, former engineer turned lifestyle engineering coach, and your host for the journey to the career and life that you desire. Hey, I believe that you shouldn't have to sacrifice your life to reach your full potential at work. And what we're going to bring you in these conversations and interviews are the strategies, the tools, and the mindsets that are going to allow you to experience both success at work and success at home. Hey, we do the best we can to keep this free from advertisements. Of course, I can't control what YouTube may throw up, but do us a favor and share this podcast with anybody who you think may like it. And don't forget to click the bell and subscribe and get notifications to our YouTube channel and for upcoming releases of the Happy Engineer podcast. I would love your feedback, and even more than that, love your story. Share with us how these strategies and tools are working for you. Would love to be in touch with you. Connect with us on social media. Find me at Oasis of Courage on Instagram, Facebook, or Zach White on LinkedIn. It's an absolute pleasure to serve you. Now let's do this. All right, welcome back. Zach White here, and I am with one of my best friends, one of my coaches, and an all-around rock star, Mr. Zander Fryer. And if I was forced to summarize all of the amazing things that I can say about Zander into one statement, I wouldn't try. It's just not possible to do that. I met Zander over a year ago. I've had the privilege of actually being under his coaching, and a lot of the success of the Oasis of Courage, OACO, is credited to this man. And just to tell you a little bit about his pages of bio that we could talk about, Zander started right where we're at, in engineering, in the life of the engineer, corporate life, and found awesome success. I mean, Zander was the guy we all wanted to be, moved up fast, had the sweet gig, the big paycheck, all the things that most people are setting out to achieve. And then found a calling and a purpose that said, hey, this isn't for me. I'm going to actually go have a bigger impact with my life elsewhere, and started helping coaches, entrepreneurs, consultants, people who wanted to take their passion and turn it into impact, income, and a full-time gig, and now is CEO of Shit You Don't Learn in College and High Impact Coaching, which is such an incredible organization that I'm privileged to have been a part of, and has now coached hundreds of engineers to, six-figure, multiple six-figure, seven-figure success and beyond. And this guy's an all-around sensation when it comes to motivational thinking, the mindset of success. And I've learned more than I can ever say from Zander Fryer. Zander, I'm so happy to have you here, man. Thanks for making time.
Yeah, dude. Thanks for having me.
This is awesome. So I alluded to the fact that you started as an engineer. Now you're a multiple seven-figure, who knows, maybe by now doing 8 or 9 figures. This guy's a wild man. By the time you
not quite there yet, but we're getting there. We're getting there.
Whenever someone hears this recording, you're probably going to already know who Zander is from some.
Yeah, it depends on how delayed you are to getting this episode out.
That's right. But I want you to share with us first, what was the first moment where you actually realized leaving corporate life is my next step? Take us to that point. What happened there?
So I want to break that question itself down. The moment that I realized that leaving the corporate world was the next thing was actually the moment I joined the corporate world.
Wow.
And I think that's something I kind of knew deep down, and maybe I didn't want to admit, right? So I think, I was in the corporate world for about 6 years. I was at Cisco Systems for 6 years. Like you mentioned, I made great money. I made $250,000 as a kid in his mid-20s, like working with companies like Disney, Facebook, LinkedIn, Sony, Verizon, Comcast, like the whole gambit. But I think somewhere deep down, I always knew that what I was doing was not it. Like that it thing. I didn't know what it was, but I think deep down I knew that it wasn't it. The moment that I actually like admitted to myself that leaving the corporate world was the next step was a very different thing. So I think deep down I maybe always knew, and I kind of like, I was always good at math and sciences. So that proverbial, what are you going to do when you grow up? Was like, I'm going to be an engineer, right? Like, my mom's Pakistani, so I'm half Pakistani. And like, if you're Pakistani, you're either going to be a doctor, a lawyer, or an engineer. Like that's all you get. Right. So, it was kind of ingrained into me. But I think deep down, I knew that it wasn't necessarily who I was. And then the moment that I actually like admitted that the next thing was not the corporate world was I actually had a mentor of mine ask me, what would you do if you couldn't fail? And at this point, I had, let's see, I was making about, 240K a year. I had a great, like, this was not a dead end job. Like I wasn't overworked. I did a really good job of like balancing my life and my work. Like I was probably working about 35 hours a week. I had complete autonomy. I was leading my own schedule. Like I had the quote unquote dream job as an engineer. But one of my mentors actually asked me, and this was an entrepreneur who made 7 figures in his health and wellness business. And he asked me, what would you do if you couldn't fail? And that was the question that really got the gears turning. And, and I told him, I said, honestly, I'd mentor people. Like I love mentoring people. I used to be in Air Force ROTC when I was in college. I was actually going to be a fighter pilot in the Air Force until I got a DUI my senior year and basically got thrown out and threw away the next 20 years of my life. And so I told him, I was like, honestly, I'd mentor people. I don't know what that means, or I don't know how that would work, but like, I love mentoring people. And ever since I got kicked out of the Air Force, that's the one thing that I feel like has been missing in my life. And he kind of told me, he said, just because you're on a path, does that mean you should walk it? And just because you're good at something, does that mean you should do it? In the end, you have to make sure that whatever you're doing, that we have one life, right? Yes. In the end, you have to make sure that that life is aligned with you, who you want to be and what you want to accomplish in this one life. Otherwise, it's a life that's wasted.
That's amazing. Now, we got to go back to this Air Force ROTC thing for a moment.
We can go wherever you want, Zach.
And what's really amazing about this to me, and I did not know this about your story, Zander, most people, when the dream gets crushed from something like that, right, a decision that you made that led to losing access to going down the path you thought you were going to go down, to then say the very next chapter of your life was 6 years of incredible success at Cisco Systems. That doesn't connect for a lot of people. Tell us about that.
So I think, when I got kicked out of the Air Force, I learned a ton, obviously, like going through 4 years of leadership Air Force RTC training. I graduated Top Gun from my field training course, which is like Air Force's version of boot camp. And then obviously getting kicked out, I was lost. I was a kid in his mid-20s who was absolutely lost. So really, I was just following the herd. Right. I was just following the herd. And, what does every lost 20-year-old kid do? They go to recruiting events, they go to the corporate job fairs. And I happened to connect with the Cisco recruiter who gave me an opportunity to interview. And I ended up landing this really amazing job because I was an engineer that, not only could engineer, but could actually communicate. Like I could actually talk to people. Right. And that was just such a crucial skill set that most engineers don't have, yet I had built that ability in the Air Force and leading. And I look at the next 60 years of my life, and you said something there, you talked about like going on to have, this amazing success. And the reality was like, sure, on the outside, it looked like success, right? Like I was making great money. Like if you asked any one of my friends, like Zander had it. Like Zander had it all. He had the title, he had the money, he had the life. Like, I was driving around Venice in my BMW, living on the beach. Like, I had all of that stuff, but like I didn't feel successful. I was chasing something that I did not feel. And I think that's a really important lesson that I want to share with people is like, success isn't necessarily the number on your paycheck or the title that you have or the client that you work with. If none of that makes you truly fucking happy, pardon my French, but like, that's not success. Right. And the second that I started to chase the feeling of success, all those other things started to come. Right. The money, the title, the paycheck, all that other stuff started to come, but I also felt full at the same time. So that 6 years in the corporate world looked like success on the outside, but inside it was a little bit of torment, to be honest. I was chasing it, that like waiting for Godot, like chasing this thing that would just never come. Right. And I think a lot of people do that in life.
Zander, you described feeling lost for a period of time there.
Sure.
For the engineer listening, if they feel lost right now with what you've come through, what would you say to that person right now?
The first thing is like, take the intentional time to get clear. Like, you have to work on it. I think so many people like, being lost is a lack of clarity, right? Like, if you don't know what you want or where you want to go, how can you ever get somewhere that's going to be fun and fulfilling and make you happy? Like, if you don't have that clarity, don't expect it to just come by continuing to move forward. I always talk about clarity like a jigsaw puzzle, right? So like clarity, you never get full clarity, but you find these little jigsaw puzzle pieces and you put them together and you get more and more clarity as you adventure through life. Now, the problem is most people think that they're going to find these little jigsaw puzzle pieces like while they're writing emails at work or like taking the trash out at home. And it's like, that's not the way this works. Like, you have to have, and you get this, right? Like, you have to have the deep intentional conversations with people that will not bullshit you, right? Like coaches and mentors. You have to do exercises that like really make you think differently about the way that you see the world and what really brings you joy and what really makes you successful. And you have to like intentionally put time and effort into getting clarity. Otherwise you end up 1 year, 2 years, 3 years down the line in the exact same position, right? This is probably one of the things that I hate the most about seeing a lot of my friends who are still in the corporate world is 3 years ago, they may have been in a different company. They may have been in technically a different role. Maybe they made a little bit less, so they moved companies. They had a different role, some new things, maybe free sushi lunches, maybe a little bit better work-life balance or something like that. But 3 years later, mentally, emotionally, fulfillment-wise, they're in the exact same spot. And they don't want to admit it, but they just spent the last 3 years thinking that they were building a little bit more happiness and fulfillment. But the reality was they never got clear on what they wanted. So they just jumped from LinkedIn to Google or Google to Cisco or Cisco to Facebook to, from Oracle to whatever, right? The new hot startup or something like that. But they're still not fulfilled because they never got clear at the very beginning of what they really wanted. Like, when you're clear on that, it's so easy to find something that fulfills you. And everybody else just kind of jumps from thing to thing, hoping that it's going to be better.
This pattern is one I see all the time, Zander. And for the engineer listening, they might be in this exact spot. They're on their third, fourth, even fifth transition.
Cisco paid me to come back and do a half-day talk at Cisco around this.
Wow. That's
how this is how like even like the big Ciscos see this problem in the engineering world. And I got paid to come back and speak at, the old organization I used to be a part of to talk about it.
So if they're caught in this pattern of thinking that leads to job hopping, company hopping, just seeking that little bit bigger paycheck, that next title on the career ladder, whatever it is, but you're going nowhere or even backwards in the things that really matter. You mentioned think differently. What is it about engineers and our thinking in your estimation that keeps us caught in that loop?
So I think one of the things that engineers do really, really well is focus, right? Like this is my gift and my curse. Like, I can hone in on something and I am locked on target. Like, the world disappears around me. Right? Because I get so into this one little problem or whatever it is that I need to solve that everything else disappears. Right? And that is a gift as an engineer. Like, most people can't do that. right? That is why
Totally.
people pay us good
Totally.
money to go solve problems, whether it's tech problems or civil engineering problems or whatever it might be,
Yes.
right? It's our ability to hone in, like laser in and focus and solve a problem. The one problem with that is you never take the time to pull your head up and look around to see what you're actually doing and where you're actually at. Like think about it, like if you're swimming and your head's down in the water and you're just swimming and let's say you're trying, like in the very beginning, even let's say you jump off a boat and you're trying to swim to shore and you just put your head down and you start swimming, right? And you never take the time to look up. Well, what if, every 10 paddles or so, you start to turn about 5 degrees, right? All of a sudden you're either swimming in circles or you're swimming back out to sea.
Yes.
And if you do not get your head above water to take a look at where the hell you're at, you're not going to end up at shore. Like you're not going to make it there. And I think that's one of the biggest problems is like our gift as engineers is focus. It's also our curse. Like if we cannot pull ourselves up to get into that right brain, more creative thinking and like take a bigger, look around, visualize the world as a whole, right? Because that's really what it takes.
With focus, the other thing I see all the time with engineers, Zander, is we get trained to constantly focus on what can go wrong. Yeah. FMEA, right? Failure modes and effects. Like we're always looking for what can break. We're always focused on the thing that's going to fail. And that honing in on negativity in design is a strength at work. And then we take that and we do it at home and in our personal life and in personal development, we're constantly focused on where I'm not getting results and the things that are not working and what's frustrating and what's broken. And it's another place where that gift becomes a curse in the way that you move through life. Is that something you could relate to, or you?
100%. And I think it's, I don't know if it's society or I don't know if it's like nature or nurture or whatever it might be. Right. But like I was very much that way. And I talk about that person as a very left brain type person. Right. Like we are, especially engineers, but society as a whole is very left brain, to be honest. Right. Yeah. It's very left brain friendly, left brain supportive, that logical, that rational, everything like that. But engineers are incredibly left brain. I was incredibly left brain. I had one of my mentors once kind of basically revealed to me that she basically said like, as a proud left brain person, you're half a person. And I was like, ooh, that actually really hurt. Right. Wow. Because I had developed an inability to flex the right brain muscle. If you think of it like a muscle, right? Like, could you imagine like having your left arm like juiced and yoked and having huge biceps, and then your right arm is like this flabby, skinny little thing? No. Right. But like, that's what we like as engineers, we do that. We flex our left brain all the time and we completely neglect our right brain. We're half a person. That's terrifying. Right. But when you learn to kind of flex that creative muscle, the visualization muscle, the emotional muscle, emotions are scary as shit until you start to get into them. Right. But then once you start to like learn to leverage both parts of your brain, you start to accomplish crazy amounts of amazing stuff. I'm in a mastermind with Walter O'Brien, who's the clinically tested smartest person alive, 197 IQ. All right.
Wow.
So 179 IQ or 197 IQ, he hacked NASA when he was like 14 years old or something like that. Just to give anybody perspective, like Einstein was a 162 or something like that. So I had this conversation with Walter because I was teaching Walter emotions because he's a completely left brain person. And so, Walter, like, it's amazing talking to him because he can actually, his left brain is so powerful, right, that he can actually fake emotion in real time. But he has no emotional intelligence. He literally, it's like a computer program. It's like AI that he can like, fake emotion real time. But the reality was like, he was jealous if he could feel jealous. If he was jealous of me being able to deeply understand people's emotions and feelings. And be on that creative side. And like you mentioned, rather just being a negative thinker and avoiding the all the faults and the security, because that's what he does as a left brain person, like you mentioned. He's like, I want to be more of a dreamer. Mm-hmm. I want to be more of a creative thinker. I want to be in that area. It's like we were talking about like how to intellectually understand that right brain stuff so that he could actually start. It was really interesting. But
Zander, so this is twice now. You mentioned earlier with the Cisco getting the job, that your balance between left and right,
Yeah.
creative and logic is what got you there. And now here it is again. So
Yeah.
like odds are really good. The engineer listening is right where I was and where a lot of engineers are,
Yep.
that they're heavy on the left brain. What's the first action? What's the first step? Like, where do you go to just take one step forward in putting what you just described into practice in our lives? Like, what do you do?
So I mean, there's a lot that you can do. I think the first step is actually just accepting that it's important.
Yeah.
Right. I think there's a lot of engineers out. So number one, accepting that it's important. And number two, accepting that you can do it.
Yes.
Right. Like, just like you just mentioned, I was in high school, I was the nerdy kid that had no friends. Right. Like you mentioned, you were that engineer that didn't have that emotional side. I'm sure a lot of this is due to your wife, like twisting you into pretzels and yoga and stuff. Right. Like, but like the reality is, like, we started there, like you and I started there. I was a completely left-brained person. Yeah. Right. Like when I was in high school, I was taking, when I was in junior high, I had to go to high school to take math. And when I got to high school, I was going to the local college to do all my math courses. So like I was the nerdy kid that was picked on. I was that guy. I didn't have friends. Right. And so I made a conscious decision. Like, I want to learn that skill. Like, I want to take my ability to learn and problem solve and apply it to the soft skill, apply it to the right brain stuff, the emotions, the communication, the creativity, because that's going to be what really makes the balance. Like in the end, like even if we're just talking about getting a raise or a promotion, right? People, I think a lot of engineers forget this. People don't get let go for not completing a job. People get let go because people don't like you. That's the truth. Yeah. Right? Like if you're a likable person, you could be 60 or 70% as productive as somebody who's unlikable, and they would get fired. Right? If you want the raise or the promotion, it's because the team sees value in you and enjoys working with you.
Yes. People love working with people who they love. They like working with people who they like.
Business is not a machine. Business is a industry of people. Mm-hmm. So if you don't have the people skills, you're gonna be in trouble.
So I want to come back and point out what Zander just did here. That's, for me, even, it's convicting and it's important. I asked the question from the left brain, what's the first thing we should do to work on our right brain? The classic engineering approach.
100%.
Zander's answer is so on point. I just want you to hear this, listening. The first step had nothing to do with do. It was simply to be aware of the importance. It's a being shift. And I talk to hundreds of engineers a year around developing in their careers and in their life. And I can tell you, it is extremely common that an engineer does not believe that emotional intelligence and this entire right side of the brain actually matters for creating the career and life that they desire.
Right.
They think they can get there just in the left brain. And you can't. That's not going to take you to the ultimate fulfillment and happiness and success in even external measures to where you want to get to. And
100%. Your functioning is half of a person.
That's a really powerful picture. This limping around with one side of my body just completely atrophied.
Weak and atrophied.
Yeah. Wow. What a powerful picture. So, all right. You said there were 2 points of awareness. Day one in corporate, you knew it wasn't for you. And then there was a day where you kind of allowed yourself to see it. What is it that shifted that you actually got honest with yourself? Because I see this with engineers all the time. You know, I'm using air quotes for people who can't see, like, you know something, but you haven't allowed yourself to know it and really then take action on it. What changed?
Death changed. I think there's a very real and rude awakening when somebody truly accepts death, right? Like I bet everybody listening to, like, we all know we're going to die, right? Everybody listening to this knows that you are going to die at some point, but you don't really believe it, right? Like if you truly believed that you were going to die at some point, you'd be a little bit more intentional around the decisions that you made in life, right? There's like, there's some study that was done that I could be completely making up right now, which every engineer hates when you do this, but I'm going to do it anyways. So there was a study that was done that I might be making up right now that, they surveyed, we'll call it 1,000, elderly people. And of the 1,000 elderly people, they basically told them, what are your biggest regrets in life? Right. And they basically like had two answers. Number one, it was like, focusing more on the relationships that mattered. And number two was not making more, like taking more risks and making more decisions purposefully. Right. It's wow. Because, as somebody who is inevitably facing their own death, they start to look back on their life and they start to think, wow, I should have made decisions different. I should have made decisions with this moment in mind. Like at the end of my life, am I going to feel like I've got regrets from earlier? Or am I going to look back and be like, take me, I'm good. Like I fucking lived, like I did it and I did it the right way. I have no regrets. Take me, I'm done. Right. And I think that's something that really shifted for me is like when I started to get comfortable with death, and it sounds a little bit morbid, but it's the truth. Like we're all going to die. Yeah. Like you're going to die at some point. Some of you are going to die sooner than you think. Right. And that's a little bit scary for people. But if you really start to accept that, like at some point I'm going to die and our time on this earth is limited, you start to make more intentional decisions. And that was basically my mentor really kind of ingrained that in me. About, I want to say maybe 6 to 8 months earlier, I lost my uncle he was 56 and he was an engineer. He was a chemical engineer. And he passed away, like no known cause. Like they couldn't figure out what it was. He was a very calm guy. He had a great job, made great money. His wife just woke up next to him one morning and he was gone. He was like, wow. He wasn't there at 56. Right. And that was the first time. And everybody always, growing up always used to tell me like Zander, you remind me so much of Mahmoud. You remind me of Moody, right? Like you're going to be a mini Moody. And like to hear that Moody died at 56, you start to question your own morality a lot. And then in that conversation with my mentor, he basically told me, he's like, Zander, when you get to my age, there's one thing that you'll realize. You'll realize that we actually don't have a lot of time on this earth. And every moment is either on purpose or off purpose. And every moment off purpose is a moment wasted. And that was the belief. That was the belief that really changed it for me. I was in Cisco waiting for my moment. I was in Cisco waiting for that sign, God to come down from the heavens and be like, my child, come this way, right? Like, not going to happen, right? Like, so, I realized for the first time that it was on me to make a decision and start to do the courageous things sooner. Because every moment that I spent not doing something that felt purposeful and fulfilling and right to me, let's not mistake this with like easy, right? Life is not easy. Life is not meant to be easy. Life is meant to be hard. But it's also meant to be purposeful and fulfilling. I work my ass off, right? I work my ass off harder in my entrepreneurial job than I did as an engineer. But I love every single minute of it. Like it lights me up. I love it even when it sucks and I hate it. Like I love that I have the opportunity to do all the things that I get to do right now because it's purposeful for me. I know that by the end of this life, I'm going to look back and I'm going to say, I did it. Like I have no regrets.
I know for me, it's, if I was listening to this, it's like, let's get away from this mortality topic for a second, but just for the sake of the person listening, like, do not let this moment pass you by. I mean, if you need to pause or stop listening to this to sit with the reality of what Zander just shared with you, I mean, I really appreciate, man, your willingness to be vulnerable about that. The question, would I at the finish line, whether that's a day from now, a year from now, or, 50 years from now, or beyond, is the path that I'm on one that I'm going to look back and say, yeah, that was the journey of my highest calling in this life. And if you don't know how to answer that question, it goes back to what Zander said earlier with clarity.
And you have to get clear.
Got to get clear. So, all right, engineers are notoriously stereotyped as risk averse, safety, security driven, take the comfort zone path kind of people. Yeah. And I just heard you describe a relationship between purposeful living and this life that you're experiencing now that's so
Yeah.
fulfilling and risk. What,
Yep.
talk to me about that.
That's a great point. In all actuality, it's perceived risk, right? In today's society, it's probably more risky to be a part of a company than it is to be able to make your own income. Right? Like when I first went to Cisco, and to be honest, like it's also a shame, right? It's a shame that engineers, who in my opinion are the most creative people in the world, like the most intelligent and creative people in the world, like your job is literally to creatively solve problems. Like that is what engineers do. Yet we pigeonhole ourselves into thinking that we can't solve, problems that really pertain to our life or anything like that, right? But the reality is, like, I still remember when I first joined Cisco right out of college, and swear to God, the first month that I was in Cisco, a company of at that point 75,000 people or whatever, let go 14,000 people. The high majority had been there for between 10 to 20 years. And they were now out on their ass. When I left Cisco, 3 months later, can you guess what happened? Cisco let go 8,000 people. I made the decision to leave, and everyone's like, oh my God, who's this crazy guy choosing to leave Cisco? And 3 months later, 8,000 people were told to leave. So the reality is, like, it can happen and it will happen to you. The riskier thing is to trust, in my opinion, trust in somebody else that you're always going to be taken care of, rather than like working on yourself, making yourself be indispensable. And I'm not necessarily saying that you need to become an entrepreneur, right? But you need to learn how to become indispensable so that you can always generate your own income and your own livelihood, right? And that could be, as an entrepreneur, it could be making sure that you are at the top of the chain as an engineer within your company, or if your company were to let you go, 8 other companies would scoop you up in a heartbeat. Right? Like that is incredibly important for you. And really learning those skill sets is actually the unrisky thing. Right. But kind of to your question, yeah, becoming an entrepreneur is quote unquote risky. Until I realized that, first of all, it's actually riskier for me to stay somewhere and let somebody else dictate my life. And then number two, if I was any form of engineer worth my own salt in engineering, what is my profession? I'm a professional problem solver.
Yes.
So even if I don't know what I'm going to do as an entrepreneur, I had to have confidence in my resolve and skills to go figure it out. And that's not risky to me. I'm not going to die going and trying this thing. And if I know that eventually I'll figure it out and I'll be better off for it, it's not really a risk.
This is a great example, and I'm gonna bring it down smaller, Zander, for the engineer listening who's like, hey, entrepreneurship isn't even on the radar for me. I don't know what you're talking about. This is crazy. Well, the
I am a little bit crazy for most people.
He's crazy good, I'll tell you. The behaviors of seeking safety and security in the comfort zone seem like they're going to prevent bad things from happening because I'm not taking these risks. And the reality is, even for those of you who are just seeking growth within your organization right now, the opposite is true. That scary thing to speak up in a meeting when the VP is in the room and you don't want to say something dumb that you could be perceived like, when you don't speak up, that's actually what's holding you back.
That's the risk. Yeah, that's the thing that's causing problems. That was the reason why I used to get promoted, was because I was not afraid to speak up, even to like the CIO of Disney, right? Like, because I was just a naive kid that didn't know any better. Like everybody else is like, oh my God, that's Susan O'Day. And I was just talking my mind. I was like, oh, it is? You mean Susie?
Exactly. I love that. So it doesn't matter where you're at in where you see your career going, or if you're an entrepreneur or you're a corporate guy or gal, it doesn't matter. The mindset of being willing to get out of your comfort zone and take the risk is critical to creating the outcomes that you actually want.
Well, so sorry to interrupt, but I think this will be really helpful for everybody, because as an engineer, like, we love to understand what's going on, right? Like if I can understand it, it makes me a little bit happier, and I'll play along.
Totally.
For all the engineers out there, like, I don't know if you know what % of your brain is the subconscious, but it's somewhere between 95 to 98%. somewhere between 95 to 98% of your brain is unconscious, and it's like a supercomputer. It's constantly programmed. You as a person are only 2 to 5% of a real person. Like that person you think is so damn intelligent is actually only 2 to 5% of a conscious thinking person. The other 95% has been programmed. It's been programmed by society, culture, media, all these other things. And it's your responsibility as an intelligent person to start to unprogram the negative crap and reprogram the positive stuff. Because it's things like you mentioned speaking up in the meeting, right? Like this is a human created fear. This is a personal society created fear of being outcast by saying something stupid. When you're first born, you have two fears, the fear of loud noises and the fear of heights. Makes sense, right? Like as a baby, as a prehistoric baby, like you don't want to accidentally wander off a cliff. And if like a saber-toothed tiger were to growl, you don't want to crawl towards it, right? Keeps you alive. Everything else, every other fear is self-created or society created. So
Wow.
glossophobia, the fear of public speaking, right? That's what glossophobia is. By the way, it has a higher percentage fear than death itself. Why? Because like I mentioned, people do not accept that they're going to die, right? So people are more afraid of speaking in public than they are of dying. But we all know that we're not going to die if we stand up in the middle of a conference and speak or speak our mind or something like that. But what happens? Your body has the same physiological response like you were just about to be eaten by a saber-toothed tiger, right? Like your blood starts to pump, adrenaline spikes just in case you need to like run or fight a short-nosed bear or a saber-toothed tiger. Blood goes to your legs and your arms in case you need to run. Your eyes, get focused so that you can find the saber-toothed tiger. Your neck stiffens so you can spot the tiger. Literally, like your bowels start to evacuate so you can become lighter and escape the tiger. These are all the things that happen. You sweat this like weird, smelly sweat so you taste bad to the saber-toothed tiger. But you're not going to die. All you're doing is getting up.
There is no tiger.
There is no, check the bathroom. There is no tiger, right? So all these fears that we create in our mind, especially because we're engineers and we like to think, the stories are insane. Like the amount of overthinking and the stories that we create in our head around, like you mentioned, all the worst case scenarios, because that's what we're taught, leads us to perfection paralysis, overanalyzing, and becoming immobile. And that is what kills you.
Over analysis to immobility.
Yeah.
I feel like that right there, if there was a theme of engineers that I talk to, it's everywhere. It's constant.
Yeah.
So, man, Zander, there's 1,000 directions I would love to go, but we need to land the plane here. And I want to ask you, I'm curious, with all that has shifted and grown and the ways that you've discovered yourself and built an incredible business with where you're at, if you were to go back into the engineering life, what's something that you would do differently now, knowing what you know from the journey you've gone on?
To be honest, I think it's all the same things that we just talked about. It's get clear on what you really want. And I think that was something, if I had been super clear on what I really wanted and Cisco had given it to me, I would not be an engineer. I would be a very happy person in the corporate world, and I would have had that life. And it
wouldn't be an entrepreneur. You'd still be.
Yeah, sorry. Wouldn't have been an entrepreneur. Yeah, I would have been in it. I would have stayed as an engineer, right? When I went back and spoke at Cisco, one of the things that I told them, I said, their big question was like, why are all the high performing millennials leaving Cisco after 3 years? And I basically told them exactly what we just talked about. Like, they're looking for alignment. They're looking for purpose, right?
Yes.
And if you don't find it, you think you're going to go find it somewhere else with a slightly better pay, some free lunch, a little bit better work-life balance. And then they go there and they don't find it. So they go to the next place and the next place. And I literally, I pointed out to Cisco, all of the engineers that stayed for 5, 10, 15 years, they found some form of alignment with what they do. And they were so happy in what they did. They didn't need to go anywhere else. Right. And so, my first piece of advice to myself is get crystal clear on what it is that you really want. Number one. Yes. And then number two, take the courageous actions to make that happen sooner rather than later, whatever it might be, and I think, we kind of talked about don't overthink it. Don't overanalyze, trust your skills, and just remember that in the end, the only resources that you can't get back is time. So what's it hurt?
Clarity and courage. You couldn't have picked two better words for the heartbeat of OACO, the Oasis of Courage.
There we go.
Here, man. So Z, thank you so much. You know this as an engineer, you know this as one of the best coaches I've ever met. In our lives, the questions that we ask matter a lot. Questions lead, answers follow. That subconscious, that 95% is going to crank hard on whatever questions we give it to work on. So for the engineer listening to this, if they want more of what you just talked about, they want the happiness, the fulfillment, they want the income and the impact, all these things, what is the best question to lead them with?
I think I would just go back to the same question that my mentor asked me that one day. Like, be honest with yourself. What would you do if you couldn't fail? Like, what would you do if fear was non-existent? Right? And be honest with yourself about what that is, because the reality is most fear is self-created. So fear is pretty much non-existent if you really start to think about it.
Fear is pretty much non-existent. It's so powerful. So there you go. Go spend some time chewing on that question. Zander, this has been amazing. I know if I was listening, and I will be, I would want more Zander in my life. Tell me, where can people go? How can they get connected to what you're doing and the incredible work that's going on in your world?
Yeah. So you can go to @Zander Fryer on Instagram if you want to keep up with everything that's going on in my life there. I would subscribe to the Shit You Don't Learn in College podcast. We just launched it about a month and a half ago, and we're growing pretty rapidly. So check that out. And then for anybody who wants to dig into the what would you do if you couldn't fail, go check out my TEDx. So just go to YouTube and search Zander Fryer TEDx and check that out. But yeah, happy to help, man.
Yeah, I will testify. Zander's podcast is fantastic. His talk's fantastic. And if you are one of the engineers listening to this and going out on your own in entrepreneurship is something that interests you, then definitely connect with Zander and his team, because they have one of the best systems you're ever going to find for turning that desire into something that can go places. So check that out. Zander, I can't thank you enough, man. It's awesome to see you. We'll have to do this again sometime.
Absolutely, brother. Thanks for having me.
Hello, my friend. Zach White here again, and I wanted to let you know that's all we've got for this episode of the Happy Engineer podcast. Thank you so much for investing your time with me today. It is an absolute pleasure to be able to bring you this content. Just as a reminder, it would be amazing if you would subscribe and share this episode with any other engineers you know who may benefit from this. And if you're like me, I hope that you'll take some notes and, more importantly, take action. In our audio version of the podcast on Apple Podcasts and any place that you go to find podcasts, there's a little more content from me about this episode in the debrief. If you really want to hear about how to put this into action, I'd encourage you to go grab that. But thank you for joining us for the video version of our interview today. And again, can't thank you enough for helping us to get the word out about the Happy Engineer podcast and what we're doing. If there's any way we can serve you, would love to do that. Go find us at oasisofcourage.com or reach out to me on social media at Oasis of Courage. And don't forget again to subscribe and click the bell to have notifications of upcoming releases of new episodes of the podcast. As always, I want to leave you with this. If you stay in your comfort zone, you're not going to grow. So let's crush comfort, create courage, and let's do this.